Focus Day on student support. In this hour, we feature a focus on fellowships. I am Catherine O'Hare, your moderator for the session. Please note today's presentation is being recorded. The presentation will last about 50 minutes. We're going to try to stick to that. All participants are currently muted. During the interactive portions, though, we invite you to unmute or use your video as you feel comfortable to interact and engage with us. If you have questions or comments, please use the chat feature or the raise your hand that we have in Teams, and feel free to speak up. We are monitoring the chat box throughout the presentation. There's a closed captioning option available in Teams, and handouts are available on the OSP training page. There's a link in chat if you would like to follow along with the slides or write notes in there. Please make note that I will post a survey link at the end or towards the end. In the chat, please submit your feedback. That is very helpful to us. This session came up because feedback was submitted during symposium, that during concurrent sessions, people weren't able to attend everything. So today we get to deep dive on fellowships in this hour. It's my pleasure to introduce Kim Melville-Smith from the Office of Sponsored Programs and Amy Oak from, oh no, I didn't write it down, Amy. What unit are you in?
College of Vet Med, Dean's office.
Dean's, that's what was in my head. And I was like, but it's a specific one. College of Vet Med. There we go. Okay, take it over.
All right. Sorry, I'm trying something new and I'm actually driving from Shannon's screen today. So it's like all different and fun. It's an adventure today. So I'm Kim Melville-Smith. I'm the Director of Post Award in the Office of Sponsored Programs. And then Amy kind of chimed in really quick there to help Kat with her introduction. So we'll be talking to you today mostly about the fellowships. Excuse me. First up, really just one, we're going to look at recognizing the differences between fellowship agreements. Two, assessing appropriate budget categories. And three, plan proactive award management. So these are all the things that we'll cover today. Oh my gosh, it's still on laser pointer. Sorry. Well, I gotta figure out how to turn that off. That's gonna bother me. Okay. So first up, just a definition to really kind of make sure that we're all on the same page when we're talking about a fellowship. So a fellowship is really to provide individual training opportunities. It can support undergraduates, graduates, postdoctoral candidates, or senior career level faculty members, or anywhere along those lines. So again, I think the keywords, and they've been highlighted on the slide, is that it's an individual training opportunity. So it's very specific for individuals. Shannon, I don't know how far I'm going.
Probably because we cover NSF first, so through NSF.
Okay.
If you want to.
Lovely. See, we fly by the seat of our pants. That's fine. We're all prepared, but it's still crazy. All right, first up, students on fellowships or training grants, they are paid through a stipend. It is not tied to hours or effort worked, so therefore it's not tracked in the, our eCert effort certification system. And it's either paid directly to the individual or through the institution. So sometimes these awards are given directly to the student and the institution is not part of the process. And then again, the work benefits the individual. Budgeting factors. So per uniform guidance, they should be budgeted as modified total direct costs. For most fellowships, that's they're kind of basically all like considered similar to participant support. So that makes sense that they're under modified total direct costs, but definitely look at the sponsor guidelines to see what's allowable and what's not allowable and recommendations, because each funding agency is different. Fellowships generally don't allow fringe, and you'll see that in the guidelines that it'll explicitly prohibit fringe from being charged to the award. They do usually encourage or require tuition remission to be covered. If you have questions on terms as we're going through, we went through a lot of these basic definitions earlier this morning. So we're not covering them again, but if you have questions on specific definitions, please make sure to raise your hand or pop in chat and we can get those definitions for you.
Kim will actually go through a couple of these, like tuition
we?
remission, so, yeah.
Okay. And then for these fellowship awards, they often come with institutional allowance or cost of education. Again, it's specified in the award document. And so you'll see those two phrases, and somewhat they act the same regardless of the wording, but there can be differences. So again, read your solicitation to make sure you understand what those are for. Generally here at CSU, we put those funds into a separate account. So you'll have an account where the stipend will be paid from, and then another account where institution allowance or cost of education funds will be stored. And the rationale behind that is because they have different benefits and they have restrictions on each one of those pots. So we want to make sure they're separate and that we can keep them distinct. So cost of education can be made up of the items here. This is not an exhaustive list. It's just kind of some highlights and most common items. So they can use it to buy their textbooks, pay for some of their housing, pay their tuition and fees, pay travel that benefits their education. Basically, it doesn't all have to be this exactly tied to their project or anything, but presenting at a national conference that interests them or something like that can be covered. Health insurance. So generally, that health insurance is through the CSU Graduate Student Health Insurance Program, but it does not have to be. It's just, it does cover health insurance, and then other costs. Some programs are very explicit about what other costs may be, some are very general. So for like the 8th time already, and we're on slide 7, read your solicitation to get clarification on that. Mentorship role. Sorry, I forget what's next. So generally the fellow has a mentor with their faculty, or it's like a mentor advisor, but it is not an individual who is dictating the work. So I think that's some of the big differences that you may want to see is like the faculty is supporting the student in their work, but the faculty is not telling the student what to do or dictating how the student does their work. There is no faculty effort on the fellowship awards that are processed through CSU. These are one of the categories where the 1% minimum is exempt from being required. So here's a graphic kind of that looks through the roles and responsibilities at CSU. So we have the Office of Sponsored Programs. Since that's where I live, that's where I start. It doesn't mean that's where this whole process starts. Just it's a circle, kind of go round and round. Actually, I'm going to backtrack. I'm going to start the fellows unit because it makes more sense logically. So at the fellows unit, they work on the proposal development, and then they do the that unit also helps with the mentoring advising. They also will manage the account, monitor the expenses, and help with reporting. Proposal, the Office of Sponsored Programs will submit the proposal if the proposal needs to be submitted by an authorized representative. If the award is to the institution, then OSP will review and accept that award. And we also help with the sponsor interfaces if we need to submit those awards. The graduate school is kind of a tangential player in all of this because they oversee all of graduate student activities. And then also the graduate school is the unit on campus that manages the National Science Foundation's Graduate Research Fellowship Program, GRFP is how you might have seen it. And if you have questions on that program explicitly, Dustin Grantham is the contact for that. And we are constantly working with the graduate school to build more resources for the overlap between sponsored projects and graduate students to make everything clear and consistent. A lot of these fellowships require that students complete what was historically called RCR, but it's now been expanded to our ECR, so Responsible and Ethical Conduct of Research Training. We have an office on campus whose responsibility it is for overseeing that program. The person that kind of manages all that is Kim Cox York. So you may or may not have been in contact with her if you or your students have been asked to complete this training. It is not a one-time quick training. It's usually a whole semester. So it's quite intensive for the students, and they need to make sure that they are completing that training because it is part of our award requirements. So on this slide, we do talk through that NIH, you know, who's required by NIH to complete the training, NSF and USDA. There's slight variations between the programs on who's responsible. NSF is expanding the RECR training as of July 31st of this year, 2023. And so it will now, faculty and senior personnel will also be required to complete that training. What that looks like is still under development at CSU. Because as I previously indicated, it's generally a semester-long course for the graduate students, and we recognize that that may not be the best way to accomplish that training for the faculty members. So stay tuned for that. For CSU fashion, you know, we still have a couple months before it's implemented. Plenty of time to figure out how that's going to look. Plenty of time. All right.
Kim, I was just gonna say that
Yeah.
the information on that last slide was taken from a really great matrix from Michigan State. If we can steal information anywhere we can, we always do. There's no reason to reinvent the wheel. That resource is in the resources at the end, and it has a lot more information in it as far as how often this training and stuff has to be taken as well.
Thank you. I thought you made it. I thought you were the awesome one. Okay. All right. Another important thing to talk about when we talk about fellowships is oftentimes within the guidelines, the students are required to be full-time students as defined by the institution. So CSU has defined full-time graduate student as a student who is enrolled in 9 credit hours per semester. So again, this is really important to make sure that you're paying attention to the solicitation and the guidelines to make sure that the students are enrolled in the proper amount of credits. Yeah, there's some caveats to that, and we'll go through each one as we go through some of the specific fellowship examples. And tuition remission definition. Basically, it just means that it's when the institution pays all or part of the student's tuition and/or fees. So as most of you know, CSU has started covering mandatory fees in a roll-in tiered fashion. So this is kind of the first time that we really even considered fees as part of a lot of this stuff. However, with under fellowships, fees have almost always been part of what we've covered. So we're now making that more equitable across campus. All right, so now we're going to start talking about some of the very specific fellowships by sponsor, because they do have some nuances that we wanted to make sure we covered. So first up is the National Science Foundation, the GRFP program that we've previously discussed. So here's a little snippet to kind of highlight what the GRFP program is. Really just helps them become lifelong leaders and contribute significantly to scientific innovation and teaching. This is off the GRFP website. So this is kind of this is how they define themselves. How are fellows determined and what are their eligibility requirements? So they have to be US citizens, US nationals, or permanent residents. They have to intend to pursue a research-based master's or PhD program in a GRFP supported field. Those fields are listed on the GRFP program website. And so if you have questions about what they are explicitly, you can find them there. You know, it's National Science Foundation, so think STEM in general, and you're pretty much covered. They have to be enrolled at an eligible accredited US institution by fall of their selection. it's recommended that they be in the early stages of their career, that they haven't completed more than one academic year of full-time graduate studies. So again, they really want to catch them early in their education. And then they're only limited to one application to the program. And again, submitted either their first or second year in the program. And the selection periods are September through August and June through May. So, and I'm trying to remember, we go into other stuff. I'm trying not to get ahead of myself. So, next slide. So applying for the program. This is not routed through this Office of Sponsored Programs. Each fellow applies for the program and is accepted directly with NSF. Once they are accepted, they let NSF know what institution they'll be attending. So this is a slightly different way of going through this process than some of the other programs. The application is submitted into research.gov, but there is no budget submission because NSF dictates the award term or the budget and the terms. So stipend is $37,000 annually, and the cost of education is $12,000 annually. References are required, so the student still needs to get references for that, but they are submitted directly through the GRFP website and program. And again, Sponsored Programs at CSU is not involved in this process for application. The GRFP award is actually awarded to the institution once the fellow has identified what institution they will be attending. So they are listed as the PI. Here at CSU, they will be set up as a GRA pre-doc, which is our fellowship appointment types. They must be full-time. So they, and tuition and fees must be provided for them. They cannot pay those costs at all. It's a 5-year award. They get 3 years of support and 2 years of reserve. So the students can mix and match that, whatever makes sense to them and whatever supports their program, supports their education the best. And then funds are managed by the graduate school. So they'll receive this. Dustin Grantham will reach out to the department and he'll tell them their salary amounts, and so they'll get set up for the stipends through the system. And then their cost of education funds he'll also inform the department about what account number to use for that. One thing to note that I don't think we have on here is that the cost of education funds are the institution's funds. The institution can do whatever they want with them, but the students cannot pay tuition or fees during their tenure. And you'll notice that they have on tenure and reserve status. So they can't pay tuition and fees while they're on tenure. If they're in reserve status, they can pay tuition and fees. That requirement is only while they're on tenure. However, their enrollment for full-time at 9 full credits has to be in place for on tenure and reserve years. So even if they're not being supported that semester or that year by the GRFP program, they still need to be enrolled in 9 credit hours per the guidelines. So I saw a question.
What does on tenure and on reserve mean? Yep.
So on tenure means that they are drawing the support from the GRFP program. So they are receiving that $3,083 a month stipend from the program, and then they have the cost of education funds for that semester or year as well. On reserve means that they're still a GRFP fellow. They're just not drawing any funds from the GRFP program during that window. Does that make sense, Kaylee? Thumbs up.
Okay. Yes, she says. The second one is an example about what about when the 9 credits exceed the cost of education amount? Will CSU cover the additional amount?
So historically, this hasn't been quite such an issue because GRFP just changed the wording in March of 22. that required them to be fully enrolled, to be full-time enrolled per institution guidelines. Prior to that, it was that they needed to be making academic progress. So students weren't in 9 credit hours, and so the 6,000 was enough. However, because it's changed, the 6,000 is nowhere near enough to cover tuition and fees for these fellows. And that's just base. We're not even talking about differential tuition and anything else that might come up. So I wish I could remember what ended up happening. This spring semester was the first semester that we really encountered this issue. And I do believe all the colleges have decided who's covering that. And I think it's different college by college. I think some colleges are just covering it. And I think some colleges have pushed it down to the departments to cover it from institution funds. So like your 16 or your 13 accounts. For some of these students, it's like $9 difference. It's really tiny. And other students, it's not tiny. So the 6,000 per semester from NSF has been set that way for, gosh, I want to say at least a decade now, if not longer. So there are conversations at NSF right now to increase that because they recognize that that is insufficient to cover some of these expenses. But until they change it, this is where we're at. And so the institution has to pick up the difference because the students are not allowed to cover any of it during while they're on tenure. So. Okay. Any other questions on that? Okay, I know this is a little small, but you should have the handouts and stuff. So really, this is just kind of looking at where the expenses incurred and, you know, kind of like how to budget for it and all that kind of stuff. I cannot see that at all. I got to go to a bigger, I'm blind, people. So the very top, ooh, pointer. This row right here is talking about the stipends and how to break out the stipends. And then here's would be like your fall fees and then your spring fees. And just again, kind of highlighting how it doesn't necessarily cover all the costs. Though magically in this one, we do have the fees.
Yeah, I'm not sure that the tuition amount is correct.
Okay.
For the 9 credit hours on this example, so we need to update that.
Yeah, I was like, magically we have it under 6,000, but I'm pretty sure that's not correct. So,
No.
But anyway, it's just an example for you guys on how to kind of look at that. Okay, that is it for NSF. So before we move on, are there any other questions about NSF? Sorry, let me specify. Okay, now I'm going to turn it over to Amy to talk about NIH. Amy, do you want control? You're on mute.
There's only 5 slides, so I think it's okay if you keep control.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about NIH fellowships. We have these very commonly in our college, so I have a little bit of familiarity. So NIH tries to provide support through various stages of an investigator's career, and they have different funding mechanisms to help do that. And so this is sort of the overall chart that they provide to show how careers are supported. And what we're focusing in is specifically the fellowship awards, and those are indicated by the F series, F31, F30, F32. I think there's actually a F33 as well. I'm not sure what it is. I haven't seen one yet. And so these are awarded to the individual. So if you want to go to the next slide. These come on 3 due dates a year. Again, you have to check though with the program guidelines and look for the IC that would be applicable to what you're doing and see if they actually do honor all 3 deadlines. Some of them only take 1 or 2. So, and then these are currently the parent funding opportunities. It's pretty easy to look them up. I believe that most of them are expiring fall this year, so we'll see new funding opportunities come up and they may match the same text. It hasn't changed much over the years, but I'm sure we'll see 1 or 2 tweaks. So again, because these are funded through the National Institutes of Health, you need to be a US citizen or a permanent resident. It's US funding for our students. They do have an international funding program, but that's a little bit separate from this discussion. And then the budgets are very, very simple. They only have a handful of things, and we'll go over those in the next couple slides. There's no indirect cost on these, period. So it states it in the guidelines as well. And then they come with 1 or 2 years of support. The exception being dual degree programs where I've seen them fund up to 6 years. And these do route through OSP. Next slide. Okay, so the stipend is really easy. You look up the current notice. Right now, that's the one listed there for FY23. I end up making sure to check right around January, February, depending on continuing resolution, we'll see new stipend rates posted. And you cannot rebudget out of stipend. Right now it's set at just over 27K a year for pre-docs. Postdocs is dependent on the career level. And then they do not allow fringe. And then the notice of award, it puts the stipend in at the time of the notice's issuance, which issues every year that the trainee is receiving the fellowship award. Usually at the same time of year. So then there's the tuition and fees component, and this is the only one where we do really any math. So in the application, you need to provide the full cost of tuition and fees per year. So we know that CSU doesn't post the new tuition and fees till really close to the start of semester, which may not be when they're doing their budgets. So they typically have to do a little inflation to capture that. Regardless of how you put it in, NIH is going to reduce it down to 60% of the cost. So that comes out to 16K pre-doc or 21K dual degree pre-doc if they were coming in at the maximum number of credits. I mean, the max amount to reduce down to 60% to get to 16K. When I say dual degree, by the way, I mean like MD, PhD programs, DVM, PhD, where they're pursuing 2 doctorate level careers at the same time. And then again, no rebudgeting. So if the money that they budget for tuition is not spent, it goes back to NIH, or well, actually, we just don't invoice for it. Next slide. Okay, so the next category is something called institutional allowance. And this is their annual allowance to go towards various things that are needed to support their career. So we talk about health insurance. Well, that really only kicks in if the institution isn't covering it fully, or let's say we ever shifted to not having the students paid as GRA PDs. That would maybe forfeit that health insurance cost. But then you think about things like supplies, equipment, books, travel to conferences, anything that's really clearly related to the training. And then that one can rebudget into tuition and fees. So if they wanted more to go towards their tuition and fees, we can do it there. But there is some sort of institutional recognition that really we need to be able to provide those costs, and they're working with a mentor in a lab that should have funding to be able to do that. And then so the last one left is childcare costs. So they are provided, and keep them in a separate account here, because if they don't have any eligible expenses, or it doesn't, they can't use those monies any other way. It's only for childcare cost, and it's only for children under 13 using a licensed childcare provider. And then you request it at time of application, and then each year it just goes into the progress report requesting it. So we keep documentation here on campus that the costs are eligible to be charged against this account. And there's no rebudgeting there. And I'm gonna ask, yep, one more slide. Okay. So I changed this top slide line up, Kim, just so you guys know. These awards go to the trainees. They're listed as PIs. I had to go look through 5 or 6 of them to make sure I was right. But so for the NIH ones, they do go to the trainees. But in our CSU system, we list the mentor as PI. And the reason they go to him as trainee is if the mentor leaves the institution, it doesn't do anything to the award. They just have to work with NIH to find a replacement mentor, put a plan in place. So the money is tied to the fellow benefiting the fellow. And then the other note is you saw on the tuition slide, if they only cover 60%, then whatever you put into the system is not going to match when the award comes back. And then here, to make things easier to track, we have the 3 separate accounts, kind of mirrors NSF in a way, in that they're all at OSP. So that's the stipend tuition, institutional allowance, and childcare if applicable. There's no carryover authority. NCEs are only allowed in the last year with prior approval, and then you cannot do any pre-award spending. So they're pretty simple awards. They're not big awards, but it's meant to help a fellow get somewhere. If anyone has any NIH questions, please let me know.
Amy, I did look up F33 because I was curious.
What
And
is it?
so it is for senior fellows. It's basically an opportunity for someone to kind of change, like majorly change directions of their careers. So if they needed some time, like to kind of take that few years to really move forward in a different direction, those would be the awards that a faculty member or scientist could apply for.
Cool. I don't see any questions in the chat. I think you're going on to NASA now. NASA.
Awesome. So I'm NASA, and we'll go through NASA quickly because NASA is a little bit niche-y. There's not as many on campus, and it's truly not a fellowship. So I'm going to take control just because I want to see if I can do it. Look at that. Okay.
Oh, I can fight you and I can click take back.
You can. We can fight
Anyway.
over control.
I want to go ahead and address Karen's question really quick in the
Yeah.
chat.
Oh,
So
I didn't see it.
Karen brought up that historically we would have budget transferred to institutional allowance accounts. Then we would do that every semester, move the money over. So we are no longer doing that because we have discovered through various ways that we were doing it inappropriately. So all of these accounts now are, we don't transfer funds over. They get a budget just like any kind of sort of like participant support account. So it's still pulled out. It's still separate because it has different requirements on it, but it's just billed through the normal billing process. And so there is no transfer of funds in. There is a budget for it, which should line up with the proposal, but we don't transfer the money over anymore.
Okay. Okay. Well, we're going to go and talk about why NASA is not a fellowship. NASA is not a fellowship because the solicitation in several places says this is not a fellowship. But NASA does give us 3 options for requesting budget and for then when the award comes in, how we manage it. So we can request it as a direct labor cost for the student, or they're known as a future investigator or an FI. And we can then put travel, tuition fees, et cetera, and do it all as other direct costs and manage it as a normal research project with indirect costs. But then they also give us these 2 other options. One of them is they said that we can request it as a scholarship, which I honestly have no idea how that would even come into the institution. I imagine that it would probably have something to do with the student account, and I don't want anything to do with it. Then the third option is going to be we can request it as participant support like we would any other fellowship. So all the student costs will come in as participant support. Tuition and fees would come in as other direct costs like normal, but they don't bear indirect or anything. So though that is the reason why when this last round of NASA fellowships went through, or NASA Finest went through in February, we decided that it was probably in the best interest of the student to choose this third option, participant support. So the applications are a little bit different as well, because the faculty, mentor, advisor, whatever is going to be the PI at NASA. And then you're going to have the FI, the future investigator, as the student. So the PI goes into NSPIRES, which is the ERA system for NASA for proposal submission. It goes in, sets up the proposal, and then sets up the student as a team member, and then basically turns it over to the student to do all the rest of the work. So the student has to do the statement of work, the references. There's other things that are necessary, but also the budget and the justification. So the student is required to do the bulk of the work on these with little or minimum effort from the faculty mentor. So the proposal is submitted through OSP, just like it regularly is. Deadlines apply. Everything is the same as if you were submitting any other research proposal or any other proposal in the system. The budget is required as part of the application, and future investigators are allowed to submit one proposal per year, but the faculty, mentors, PIs, advisors, whatever we want to call them, it's unlimited. So if they had 10 students who all wanted to put one of these in, 10 students could put one in. So the budget for NASA is a max of $50,000. It's for over 3 years, so $150,000 total. And NASA is pretty okay with making the categories work for us. Let's put it that way. They suggest that the stipend should be $40,000 a year, but if that's too little or too much, then we can take it from the other $10K, which is supposed to be used for support of educational costs for that student. So they're okay with mixing and matching in here. And because of that, we can be a little bit strategic on how we budget for these and then also manage it at the end. So the other support costs for the education and training needs are going to be your tuition, your fees, travel, other. NASA does not allow any equipment in their budgeting, and they only allow computing if the institution has a policy for computing. So it is discouraged. So I forgot we had this little thing, but wait, 10K won't cover tuition and fees. Well, like we talked about with NSF, at the very least on NASA, we are allowed to kind of mix and match this a little bit. And also, let's go to the next slide. When it is awarded, we can also have the students take a hiatus. So I'm going to this third point. I'm skipping over a couple things and we'll go back to it, but we are allowed to have the student take a hiatus during the award, which means you can budget and say they're going to just be on the NASA during the academic year, reduce your stipend a little bit, and pay for all the tuition and fees possibly. So there is some wiggle room in there. Now, again, I'm not suggesting that the students aren't working on what they should be working on. That's not giving us the ability to just put them on whatever we want. Students still need to, if they're taking a hiatus and working on another project, they need to be working on that other project. So just wanted to mention that we do have a couple of examples in the resources of what a budget might look like and a justification might look like for a NASA. But we're not going to go over that specifically today. So again, when we get the award, the PI is the mentor advisor here at CSU. It is issued as a research grant, not a fellowship. But But while working on the finest, if we set them up in that participant support category, which is what we're suggesting, just due to the fact that it's only 50,000, if you put it in the other direct, it's going to take direct costs and fringe. And so that's going to be a good portion of that budget. So if we do that, then we are still setting them up as GRA pre-docs, just like any other fellowship recipient. We won't have any fringe, and participant support won't have any indirect costs because indirect costs are not allowed on these awards. Also, PI, co-PI time is not allowed per the solicitation. So this is also another one when we're treating this as participant support that we have made the decision that 1% effort is not required by the PI on this as well. So, but again, it's managed just like any other research project. So annual progress reports, final reports that the future investigator are required to make to NASA. So, and again, just the tip is that tuition follows effort. So you can be strategic on how the student stipend is set up during the academic year and how we manage that and what we request from NASA. We just need to let NASA know how we're going to be doing that up ahead of time. So that's about it. Are there any questions? Because I know that there were quite a few finalists that went through from people who hadn't done them before.
I think one thing to highlight too, Shannon, is with this being strategic about how you budget and how you apply it, is that the student's stipend should be comparable to what's in your unit.
Correct.
So you don't want to give them 30,000 spread over 12 months just to cover, so you can cover all their tuition and fees. If you think about what you're doing and how it's all going to play out, their stipend should be comparable to the other students in the unit.
And that's true across the board for all of our programs, right? We don't want to be, you know, making this bad for our students. I mean, this is just, that's not what we want to be doing. So they should be making the same amount as the other people in their unit at doing the same work. So consistency. Okay. Well, I'm going to turn this over to Kim because we have a little bit of a, do you want to take, or do you want me to do? Oh, look at you. Kim, you're on mute.
Well, of course, it's yelling at me that I'm on mute, but I'm just trucking along because it's great. So the last ones we're going to talk about today are USDA fellowships. USDA fellowships, I want to say always come, but it's very hesitant to use the word always, but most of the time come from NIFA, the National Institute of Food and Agriculture, and it's their pre-doctoral fellowship. Again, the training team did a great job of finding a little kind of blurb on these fellowships and what they're for and what their purpose is. I just got the 5-minute warning, so I'm going to try to hustle. Eligibility for the NIFA fellowships. I'm sure you're all just getting used to this now. U.S. citizen, U.S. national, permanent resident. This one, they want them to be current doctoral students and preferably at the dissertation stage. So really, this is more mid doctoral degree program compared to early program where like NSF and some of the other ones want early. So this one is definitely at a different stage of their program. They really encourage applicants from underrepresented groups to apply, and the application must align with at least one of the 6 AFRI Farm Bill priorities. Shannon, I believe that's in the resources, correct?
Yes,
link to it? Okay.
The solicitation is in there, yes.
Okay, so you can see what those Farm Bill priorities are. And it's probably going to change each time they do a new Farm Bill of what the most important priorities are. So definitely make sure you read the solicitations. To apply for the fellowship. So the fellowship, they should be listed as the sole program director, basically, and then their faculty mentor would be listed as a co-program director. However, like everything else at CSU, the faculty mentor would be the PI on our internal system, and the student would be the co-PI. And then it is recommended that it be submitted by in this case, CSU through grants.gov. So this would go through OSP. They do have a stipend of $35,000 annually and up to $22,000 annually for tuition fees, fringe benefits, supplies, travel, workshops, publication, blah, 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 all that other good stuff. There is an institutional allowance of $3,000. This institutional allowance is actually in lieu of indirect. So it can be used for all sorts of things. So you'll notice here at CSU, we will no longer be putting institutional allowance in its own account because there are no limitations on that funding. So it will stay in the main account with the other funding. The grant duration is up to 36 months and no indirect is allowed. Again, this is awarded to the institution. They are required to carry out their project on a full-time basis. This does not define full-time per institutional guidelines. So again, this is more of just kind of academic progress and continually working on their degree program. They must attend one of the meetings, and so travel should be budgeted to cover that meeting expense. Renewals are not allowed. Carryover between project years is not allowed for the stipend. So institutional allowance and all those others can be carried over, but the stipend cannot be carried over. And they may be eligible to be converted to a standard grant. What that means is if the doctoral candidate graduates and they still have time left, they can actually transfer it over to a regular grant where they are the PI now as a scientist or the full investigator. So to sum it all up, which
I
is
have 3
which?
polls. I have a quick quiz. You did that fast, Lee. Wow. I don't know a lot about the USDA ones because I've never been an officer on a USDA one, so I thought that was interesting. We didn't get to do that one in the fall, so thank you for sharing that part. Okay, here's our first quiz question. This major agency awards its fellowships directly to the fellow instead of the institution. Who is it? NASA, NIH, NSF, or USDA? Okay, I have 3 responses. We have 30 people in here. Okay. 7. Can we at least get to 15 per people? This is an anonymous survey. I'm not collecting names, so you're okay to put in an answer. Whatever you think it is. No one's guessing USDA. Good job. I'm going to close it in 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. I think you can all see the results now. Someone give me a nod. Yes. Okay. NSF. Is that the correct answer? Yes. That was the one we talked about. It goes directly to the fellow and the grad school works with them. So it doesn't go in the system like our other ones. If there are any questions, please put it in the chat. I'm going to launch the next one. Our presenters will address your questions. This major agency does not allow equipment to be purchased on the fellowship grant, including computers. Which one is it? NASA, NIH, NSF, or USDA? Ten responses already. Whoa, and it's overwhelming. Can we hit 15? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, nice. We made it to 16. And the results are in. NASA is the biggest answer. Did I just see Kim clap? Did we discuss this one? Did we cover it? Yeah, okay. I'm trying to remember. Yes, equipment is not allowed, including computers. Okay. Last one. This major agency does not allow pre-award spending, automatic carry forward, or automatic no-cost extensions with its fellowships. Which one is it? NASA, NIH, NSF, or USDA? There's a little trick on this one. You can technically request approval for a no-cost extension, but it's not automatic like on a regular grant. You know, where you just go click the button, you say, I'm going to do an extension. Okay, let's close in 5, 4. The majority has it. That's good. 3, 2, 1. And it is NIH. Nicely done. Any other thoughts or comments? Nothing else came up in the chat before we close out. We made it to 52. We're only slightly over. In the next hour, we're going, sorry, Sharon, go.
I was just gonna say in the resources that we have a matrix of the 4 fellowships we covered and kind of some differences between them. So just FYI. So this kind of nicely puts it in perspective.
Yeah, you can find that again on our website. Thank you for putting that together, Shannon. Okay, a recording of today's webinar will be on our website. We'll post it to our YouTube and the OSP website with other resources. Please fill out the survey that I put in the chat because it's really helpful to us to make more offerings available to you and things that our community needs. And thank you to our presenters. We will see you again in 7 minutes if you're joining us for the 2 o'clock session on training grants specifically. Okay, on behalf of OSP and the Training and Professional Development Committee, thank you for your participation today and have a great day.